Welcome to Recover Out Loud, where we believe that shame can only thrive in secrecy, and the moment we begin to speak aloud upon it, it will lose its power. Now, tonight's guest, I couldn't be more excited about. I had the pleasure of meeting her about a year ago. I think we have this stigma on recovery where we think recovery is only for addicts, but her story will prove different. She is our Community Outreach Coordinator for Recover Out Loud, and she does many things behind the scenes that a lot of people don't notice and don't see. She does a lot of our brochures, any of our materials. She reaches out to other community partners and really brings Recover Out Loud together with the community. So without further ado, I would like to bring to you our Community Outreach Coordinator, Meagan Cothron.
Hey.
How you doing tonight, Meagan?
I am honored to be here on my 1 year with Recover Out Loud and doing something new. You know, this is fun. This is great.
Well, let's kind of talk about that. You know, a year ago, you came into Recover Out Loud for the first time. I know before that, I've gotten to know your story a lot over the last year, and I know you tried recovery a few other times.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it about recovery? Why was recovery something you sought? Why was you so interested in it? And how did it affect your life?
Well, first, going back to my parents, I have to say that that's kind of where my spark for recovery started. Although I didn't know that it was going to end up being my own recovery, that I was going to end up being a part of. I grew up in addiction. My mother abandoned me when I was 10 years old, and I was raised by my dad. And he was, for the most part of my life, he was a functioning alcoholic and addict. But when I was 24 years old, at that point, my mom had some claim time, and my dad was no longer functioning in his addiction. And my brothers and I did an intervention, and we got my dad in treatment in the Salvation Army for the first time when he was 45 years old. So watching him go through his process of recovery really sparked a passion within myself that I wanted to do more with recovery. I just wanted to help more people. So I started going to school to become an addiction counselor. I became a recovery coach, yada, yada, yada. But it wasn't until May of 2018 that I came to a point in my own journey that I knew recovery wasn't just for the people I loved. It ended up being for something that I desperately needed for myself.
So I hear you say this a lot, that addiction raised you. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting here kind of talking about your dad and your mom and your brothers and how they were the ones kind of the addict. Right. You yourself never was the addict, but when you say addiction raised you, what was that like? What's that feel like? What's it mean to be raised by addiction?
One word, chaos. It was constantly surviving, constantly adapting, constantly changing. You could never settle into anything. When things would go good, you kind of embrace yourself when the next storm was going to come. And I feel a part of my personality now is that I'm so diverse and I adapt and adjust to anything that my environments, people that I'm surrounded by because of my upbringing and addiction. We were constantly moving. Sometimes I didn't know when our next meal was going to come. I didn't know what to expect when I came home from school that day. I didn't know when the next time I was going to hear from my mom, or when I did hear from her, if she was going to be in active addiction, if she was going to be in jail, if she was going to be in rehab. So it's like I lived in this constant element of surprise, never knowing what was going to happen next. So you just kind of prepare yourself for the worst. And that mindset, you never fully get to live life because you don't know when life is going to hit again. So you're constantly on guard.
And what I like about that is you talked about the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really unique about this interview and your story is the fact that you were never the addict. But being in addiction is chaotic. Right. And you even brought it up yourself. It was chaos that was raising me. as a young woman in this world, and as addiction's doing this, this is your environment, this chaos, you don't know what's coming next. What kind of influence do you think that had on your mindset, the way you've seen the world, the way you viewed the world?
I think the thing that when I realized that I needed recovery, it's because for the first time in my life, I was able to open my eyes to the impact that addiction really had on me. And for the most part, I seen it in my relationships. When I was 15 years old, my first high school sweetheart, he was addicted to pills. But again, that was normal to me. I didn't see any red flags there. So for 3 years, I'm in this toxic, unhealthy relationship with this teenage boy who depended on pills every day of his life. And it took me 3 years to realize that that's not normal. So coming out of that relationship, it didn't take long for me to fall into my own unhealthy behaviors of going out and partying all the time. And I didn't realize that there was a successful life out there for me at that age. I was just kind of lost in the lifestyle of just mediocrity.
Sure.
I never aimed for much. I didn't raise the standards for myself. I didn't have much values or morals. I didn't really have much goals. And I just kind of lost myself in the surroundings, and no matter what I did, it seemed like addiction was everywhere and I couldn't get away from it. And it's just because I think I was so immune to it.
Did you ever have the notion or the need or the thought to maybe that you could fix them? That if you tried hard enough that maybe you could fix them and therefore your world could get better?
I think I thought that if I loved them hard enough, that maybe they would have a chance if I didn't give up to them. I felt as if it was my responsibility to love them through thick or thin, that if I gave up on them, that they had no chance, that it was going to be me loving them through that addiction. And I took a lot of that responsibility upon myself, even as a young age. I was 10 when I made the choice to leave my mother to go be with my father because of her addiction, and I took it upon myself to, as if it was my responsibility to help raise my brothers and make those adult decisions as a 10-year-old. And I think that carried on throughout the rest of my life.
Where do you think that responsibility came from?
I felt like I was, it was my role, I was the oldest of the four of us. I have 3 younger brothers, and when my mom stepped down and gave up as a mother, it was as if I was the only one I was the next one in line to step up to the plate. And if I didn't do it, then no one else was going to do it. So again, putting into survival mode, if I don't do it, then we're not going to survive. We're not going to get through this. So it's just like my motherly instinct kicked in at a very young age, and as if my brothers needed me, my dad needed me, and I answered to that call. And I did what I felt like I needed to do as an older sister, as a daughter, and I fulfilled those responsibilities.
So you tried it. You tried to love them until they could love themselves. What lessons did you learn?
They gotta love themselves more. They gotta want it more than you want it for them. And there's nothing I could do to make them want it more. And the biggest lesson I came to the conclusion of that all the while I was trying to save them, I was killing and destroying myself. And it took me 28 years to realize that. And that's where I found myself at a state of complete brokenness, depression, loneliness, and just overall really unhappy with who I was and where I found myself in my life. And that I didn't need to worry about them anymore, that it was me that I needed to worry about and love. That I deserved all that love that I was putting into each and every one of them. I deserved every ounce of that for myself. And I needed to be selfish with my love for the first time in my life.
I totally agree with you.
Mm.
So I'm going to dive a little deeper.
Okay.
And I want to get into some harder things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about your father.
Okay.
And I know you really admired your father.
Yes.
You loved your dad.
Mm-hmm.
But he struggled with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up getting around 18 months clean.
Yes.
And you had a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And can you elaborate on that hope? What did it feel like to have your father back after seeing him that way? And how does that still, how's that still with you today?
So my first exposure to recovery was when I had my oldest daughter back in 2012. And at the time, my mother was still in active addiction, and I gave her an ultimatum that if she wanted to be a part of my kid's life, that she needed to get help. So my mother went into the Dove Recovery House, and she stayed in that program for a year. That was my first exposure to what real recovery is. Up until that point, recovery was still a very hidden concept from the regular world, unless you were in active addiction yourself and you went to NA or AA, and I heard of those things, but I never really was exposed to recovery until then. But with my father, it was way different because I walked every step of the way with my dad in his journey of recovery. I was there every Sunday to attend church with him. I made sure to pick him up every week to spend time with us. I made sure he had money every week. I made sure he had his cigarettes, had clothes. And I really involved myself in his process of recovery. And that is when I really seen the full transformation from the inside out. And even with my mother, I seen it on the surface, but my mother never went through that transformation from the inside out. With my dad, I seen the full change. I seen my dad smile again. I seen my dad laugh again. I seen him find this joy for life that I hadn't seen my entire life. My dad was a workaholic, which was another one of his addictions. He worked every day of his life to help provide for his kids. And I always seen that stress on him. So for the first time, I see my dad breathe and live and be happy. And he was very involved with us, with his family again. So that gave me a lot of hope. I remember Christmas of 2014, we were celebrating Christmas together, and I looked around and my entire family was sober together for the first time ever. My entire life, all of us were sober together. And I just remember that being an answered prayer of mine ever since I was a child. And for the first time, I felt like, wow, I'm going to have my family back. And it wasn't a year later that hope was ripped out of my chest. And I didn't think long-term recovery was possible. I seen so many people get sober, relapse. And when my dad relapsed, I kind of lost that hope again, that maybe I'll never have my family back. Maybe recovery isn't possible, maybe for some, but not for my family at least.
So you got to see a glimpse of what recovery could be, what it could be, but it obviously didn't stick. But how do you think seeing that, just seeing what it could be, how has that impacted you? How has that influenced you? How'd that pull you through some dark times, or did it?
For me, I want to finish what my dad didn't get to finish. So for me, I wanted to finish what my dad started, that he couldn't finish, and carry on his message. I did see real recovery, And although his recovery was short-lived, it didn't take away the quality of his recovery in that short amount of time. And he does have a message to tell. He does have a story. And although addiction took him away from here, so he's unable to give that message himself, his message of recovery can still live through me. And I think that has carried me through a lot of dark times because it has given me a purpose. I can't let my dad's death be meaningless. And again, going back to when I was 10, someone has to step up to the plate. And my family's not able to do it because they're still stuck in their own addiction still. I'm the only one that is even capable of carrying on my dad's legacy. And if I don't do it, then my dad's death, his story dies with him.
So I'm starting to see the responsibility, where it's coming from, where you're feeling it. I think in the beginning you put that responsibility as you're going to help here, here, and here. But now that responsibility is kind of shifted to where you understand you can at least take the responsibility of carrying on that legacy.
Right.
And that's something that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to talk on your mom a little bit. Because I know she's struggled in her own ways. And from what I have gathered, your mom wasn't a very good leader as a mom. And, what was that like?
Up until, I was 10, going into 4th grade, my memories of my mom was she was a great housekeeper. I always came home to a clean house. There was always dinner on the table. But that was the extent of it. I don't remember my mom really teaching me anything. And so when she completely vanished out of my life for a large part of 15 years, in and out, that left me to teach myself how to be a woman. I had to learn a lot. There was a lot of other women that had to kind of take that place. My grandmothers, although I was not close with my stepmother, she did teach me a lot of womanly things. I relied on mothers of friends to teach me. I had to gravitate towards any woman role model that came in and out of my life, which again brings back to my diverse personality because I was taught by so many different people. There was not one woman that raised me. I was raised by so many different women, whether it was for 6 months that they were a part of my life or a year, or someone who was a strong foundation like my grandmother. But for the most part, I had to raise myself as a woman, and that took a lot of hard lessons, a lot of trial and error, a lot of mistakes, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. But the one thing that my mom did teach me is she taught me the mother and woman I never wanted to become. My mother is the reason why I didn't become a drug addict, because my mom scared me of hard drugs. My mother's addiction was to crack cocaine, and she was like the stereotypical crack addict who was on the streets, in and out of jail, was in and out of rehab, homeless. So to me, I didn't want anything to do with that. My mother was also the reason why I didn't get into those domestic relationships, because I never wanted a man to treat me the way my mom allowed men to treat her. She steered me away from living that life, and for that I can be very grateful. I remember visiting her in prison one day, and I was visiting her, and the table next to us was a mother visiting her 19-year-old daughter. And I remember looking at my mom and saying, that could be me, but instead it's you.
I hope that our viewers sitting here watching right now can see what I see. I see a woman, a young woman, with a father who was a heroin addict, correct?
Opiates,
yeah. A mother who never even taught you anything, addicted to crack, and some other things, prostitution, things like that. And in most cases, kids become who their parents are. I really have to admire your strength. I don't know how you did it, and how you avoided those things, and how you seen what not to do instead of what to do.
Right.
How do you think that happened? Like, how did you see that? Like, where did that come from?
I think a small, there was seeds that were planted along the way. I remember being a young child and this mentor of mine through a church. I looked up to her. Her name was Kim. And she was in my life for a short amount of time, but there was seeds that were planted in me during that time. And I remember the influence she had on me, and I remember feeling loved by her. And I remember looking up to her. And, you know, that relationship carried on for a couple of years in my life. Being in middle school, my best friend's mother took me to church, took me to go do things like pumpkin patches and taking me on vacations and treating me as one of her own. Those seeds were planted in me. And I think those little seeds of people coming in and out of my life, enough of those gave me hope that I have a life ready for me. I have a brighter future. So no matter what I was facing in those moments, I knew tomorrow was going to be better. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it. Life had to be more than what my current situation is. And I think I always held on to that hope of, if I just make it through this time, if I just fight through this day, that I will get to the other side of this, whatever that was supposed to be. I knew I had a life waiting for me somewhere at some point in my time. And I was always very future oriented. I tried my best to not live in the past because it hurt too much. And my present for the longest was not very good either. So holding on to the future is what got me to fight through that day, whatever I was going through.
Absolutely amazing grit and faith to get you through something at such a young age, when we're really just very impressionable. So I have to commend you for that.
Thank you.
Let's go to May of 2018. I know this is a very significant month for you. Mm-hmm. So kind of explain that what happened up to those events and then afterwards.
Yeah. So leading up to May, I have to kind of touch point because it all is a process that I had to go through. So coming out of high school, coming out of a relationship with someone who struggled with a pill addiction, 3 months later, losing him to an overdose. I went into my own depression and I started using pills as a way of coping with that grief and just numbing myself out because it was too painful. That was also around the time that my dad started getting into pills really bad, and I was finding needles, and I just kind of really disconnected from my family during this time. And so I wanted to have a family life, so I met a man who was 10 years older than me. We ended up getting married, having kids. Within 5 years, he was becoming an abusive alcoholic, was very possessive over me. And so I left from that marriage. I then lost my father. During this time of transitioning out of a 5-year marriage, I met someone who was in rehab, and he had 4 months sober. And again, this is where I seen the impact of addiction in my life, red flags everywhere, and I just willingly walked into this relationship and was so blinded by love. And I was in this relationship for almost 3 years, and he struggled with heroin.
The whole time?
The whole time. It did not take 2 months into our relationship that he relapsed, and I caught him high on my birthday.
Why do you think you couldn't leave at that point?
At that point, hindsight's 20/20. You're not thinking this when you're in the midst of it, but looking back, right after he relapsed, it was literally 2 weeks after my father died. I couldn't handle another loss. Mm-hmm. My dad's loss was enough for me to bear.
I see the pieces.
And I had to gravitate towards something. And for me, I was going to love him and save him the way that I wish I could have done my dad. And if I could reach somebody, it was a way of escaping my own pain. He became my addiction. He became my distraction. He became my escape. And it was just a perfect storm. So I just immersed myself in this relationship. And don't get me wrong, I was still working on myself. I was still going to school. I was learning how to be financially independent for the first time in my life. I was starting my career as a recovery coach. So it was like, it was coinciding with all these good things, but this great cloud of addiction just was still hovering over me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get away from it. And so I was stuck.
I had a pretty significant epiphany as you were talking, because I want to show the parallels between your story and our story. You know,
Right.
we're both addicts, or we both need recovery, or however you want to look at this. But what I hear you saying, the first thing that came to my mind was functioning. You know, you really exemplified exactly what it means to be a functioning, you know, as they would want to put it, addict. So but maybe you're a functioning codependent. I don't know how you want to put it.
Right.
But I think that was it. So as you're functioning like that, and you know, you're trying to save them with your love, go ahead with your story, but I want to make that point.
Yeah, I was definitely functioning. I was living by day and I'm living a totally different story by night. I would get up, go to work as a recovery coach, and then come home and deal with that pain. You know, I would go to work and teach people about recovery and get them on all this treatment, and then go home and enable my boyfriend and his. And I did that for a long time, but the thing about it is that pressure of lying and living a life in shame and in secrecy, it catches up to you. And that's kind of what happened to me in May of 2018. Just a few months before that, I had stepped down from my job as a recovery coach. At that point, I was smoking weed every day. I was drinking on weekends. You know, smoking weed was a way of helping him in his heroin addiction, because that's better than him doing heroin every day, and I just fell into that trap with him. And so I think a part of that guilt played into my decision of stepping down as a recovery coach. But also I was trying to find myself too, and I knew that wasn't me either.
Right.
So along this journey, life is starting to come back to me a little bit. My eyes are starting to wake up. It's like I was kind of in a slumber since my dad left. I just kind of fell into this, I don't know, I just kind of quit living. I was going through the motions. I was getting up, going to work, taking care of home, taking care of kids. But spiritually, I was dead for a good 2 years. So around this time, I'm starting to awaken again. It's kind of like I was in hibernation for a really long time. And so when that started happening, I started to see the truth of my relationship and how that wasn't good for me. I started to look at my life and realize it wasn't what I wanted, and starting to make little steps to figuring out what about my life I wasn't happy with. And it took me 3 months to realize that my boyfriend was a part of that problem. And when that truth hit me, it hit me hard. It was not the truth I was wanting to deal with. Also at the same time, my mother was relapsing. My brother was suicidal. He was relapsing. And again, the perfect storm, it all hit me at once, and I went into this 3-day depression that I've never experienced before.
I think this is good. What do you think?
Yeah. So a 3-day depression that I've never experienced before, and then honestly it scared me, because no matter what I ever went through in my life, besides when I was 18, losing my high school sweetheart, that was the only time in my life that I ever felt depressed. Everything else, I never allowed it to really get me down. I try to stay positive, optimistic as much as I can. I always try to stay solution focused because that felt like I had control of something. But this time, it was a worse of a depression than when I lost my dad.
So I feel like you're coming to a surrender point.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what it was. And I remember after 3 days of being depressed, I pushed myself off the bed after being in bed for 3 days. I went to church and I remember surrendering to God, saying, if you want me to let this relationship go, you need to make that loud and clear. And I don't remember what it was, but I knew that's what I needed to do. So the next day, he left for work and then baseball, and with all the courage and strength I could possibly muster up, I calmly packed all his things. And I knew that because I was not an emotional wreck, that I was doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
When he came home, I had to barricade myself in the garage because if I didn't, I was going to stop him, and I knew I couldn't stop him. I knew I needed to let this go, as difficult and hard as it was, and I let him leave. And at that point, I was living in his hometown. I had lived there for 2 years. All my family was in Indianapolis, so I was away from every support system I've ever had, and the only people I had there at that time was a church that his family was a part of. Everybody that I knew was a mutual relationship of me and his. And so I really found myself in a very lonely spot in my life. But it was a good lonely because for the first time in my life, I had to face myself. And that is where I really found my moment of surrender. And that's when I started changing and facing myself and looking at myself in the mirror for the first time in probably a decade.
What did you see?
It was pitiful. It was very broken, very weak. I did not like what I seen in the mirror that day because I knew I was so much more than that girl. To me, I was still being a girl. I was a girl that grown up. I found myself 28, but I never healed. So that breakup, all that breakup did was rip off a Band-Aid of years of unhealed wounds, and that's why it hurt so deeply, because I couldn't cover it up anymore. I was either going to face my life, and I had no choice. I had to face it. It was either now or never.
So here's the great divide. That's how I would call it. You know, your surrender point. I can see through your story as it's progressing exactly what's going on. I can see the pain. I can see how you thought you could fix it. I can see how you kind of dive deeper and deeper to other people's problems and don't see your own. And now here we are at your great surrender. You've been humiliated and you're alone. Mm-hmm. And you're feeling that isolation. But this time it's a good isolation.
Right.
It's an isolation that you needed to go through to face yourself.
Yes.
So let's get to that, you know, starting to face yourself and the good parts, you know, how do we come back to life? So I know with you, it really began with this thing they call the Emmaus walk.
Well,
or before that.
It did. It happened before that. So the very next day after he was gone, my kids left for the weekend with their father. So this was like the first time me sitting in this home by myself.
Okay.
And I didn't like the quiet. So I went shopping for summer clothes. And I hated trying on every outfit that I tried on, and I was getting entirely emotional. So I went home after buying one outfit, and I remember bringing in a body length mirror into my living room, and for hours I just sat there and criticized myself to death and just looked at this person that I had become. And it wasn't a bad criticism, it was just, I was just being brutally honest with myself. What the hell happened? And that is where it really started.
Okay.
That day in the mirror. The next day I woke up, and of course I'm still going through intense heartbreak at this time, but what I could change in that moment was my outer appearance that I was not happy with. And I remember looking into the gym membership the next day. I remember going to the grocery store, no longer buying pop. I remember going for walks every day. I remember immersing myself into a journal, and really starting these little steps of self-love, because I knew in that moment that I looked at myself in the mirror, what had happened is that I stopped loving myself somewhere. I can't pinpoint the moment I stopped loving myself, but it was a very long time ago. And I knew if I was ever going to get better, I had to start loving myself again. And so I started my journey of self-love. But it was not easy because I'd never done it before. I didn't know what I was doing. I've taught, and again, I've been around recovery and addiction long enough to know that what I needed was a recovery process.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the same behaviors in the thinking process and the unhealthy habits that people with addiction struggled with. I've seen it all over me. And I knew I needed recovery and healing. But it's one thing to teach it to everybody else than to apply it to yourself. I never did a recovery process myself, so I had no idea where to start. I was just starting somewhere.
How did you just know that this was a matter of self-love? And how did you know that, those small things that you could change? Because like you said, you never recovered before, so how do you really know how to do it? Like it's one thing to say it, one thing to do it.
Right.
And you started to do it. How did you know, or was it just an act of courage?
Well, of course it's an act of courage to ever even look at yourself in the mirror. That takes a lot of courage when you've avoided it for so long. But I knew it was a matter of self-love when I looked at myself in the mirror and all I could see was pain. And it made me cry, and it made me uncomfortable, and it made me sad. There's a problem if you can't look at yourself in the mirror and feel happiness. And I just remember looking at myself in the mirror and facing myself until it hurt so much that I just sat there and cried in front of that mirror. I knew at that moment I had to have hated myself. Otherwise it wouldn't have been so hard. And I don't think it was a matter of hating myself. I was so apologetic to myself. I felt remorse for putting myself through all of that I didn't deserve that, and I deserved so much more than what I was doing to myself. And so I just felt remorse. And I knew the only way you can say you're sorry, but change behavior is the best apology that you can give.
Absolutely.
And if I was that sorry to myself, then I needed to make some changes. I needed to prove to myself that I was sorry and that I deserved more. And so those little changes was my way of proving to myself that I deserve more, and I am worth more, and I should love myself, and I am valuable.
That was a fantastic self-realization, by the way.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people, when they say change behavior, that their automatically thought goes to somebody else, and to bring that back on you was a great self-realization. I think was probably extremely important.
Yeah.
In your process.
Yeah. And that really stemmed from the part that if I didn't take responsibility, I was going to have so many resentments and bitterness. I was going to hate this guy. I was going to hate my mother. I was going to be angry at God. I was going to be mad at my dad. And I knew that that wasn't the solution to my problem, to shift blame on everybody else. And I knew that if I was really going to heal, that I needed to realize that I found myself in this mess, in this pain, because I allowed it. I caused it. I chose this relationship. I chose to stay in this relationship. I found myself in that predicament because I either allowed it or I made the choice to approve it.
Sounds like you identified the problem.
It was me.
It was you.
It was me.
So let's talk about the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that?
So the solution, I knew one thing was I had to do everything different. At that point, I was lazy. I was a homebody. So I knew one of the things I needed to do was to get around new people, try new things, avoid being home as much as I possibly could. Not out of avoidance of myself, but out of way of getting myself outside my comfort zone. So if I was invited somewhere, even if I didn't feel like going, I said yes. I made myself intentionally try something different, no matter what it was. And again, that came with a lot of trial and error. I was still experiencing with going out and partying because it was a new crowd I can go hang out with. I started hanging out with old high school friends because you revert back to what you know. So I had to relearn life almost. So it was just trying on different things and see what fit. But it wasn't until the Emmaus walk that I really was able to break away from everything I've ever known and really start new. So that was probably that was the turnaround point for me.
Let's talk about the Emmaus walk and the events that followed that. So let's dig into that first. What was significant about the Emmaus walk? This is starting to become a popular thing out there.
Yes.
So let's talk about that, how it impacted you and what happened.
So leading up to the Emmaus walk, I was still struggling with letting go of this relationship. It was still weighing pretty heavy on me. I was still stuck in this town. So I knew going into this Emmaus walk, kind of subconsciously or prematurely, that it was going to give me all the answers that I was looking for, whether God was going to restore this relationship or I was going to have to completely let go of it and move forward. So I knew I was coming to my fork in the road. And when I walked into this Emmaus walk, it was and prior to that, I kind of let myself go. Like I was partying all the time. Because I knew that my playtime was coming to the end and it was going to be time to get serious about life again. So I kind of just allowed myself to be free for a minute. Free from choices, free from consequences, not caring about anything in the world. Because I knew Emmaus was going to change my life. I don't know how, I just knew it. I felt it. I felt me coming to that shift in my life. And I was preparing myself for it almost. So coming into this Emmaus walk, I remember that first day they showed this video. And this guy was walking and he was talking, and by the end of the video, he came to this fork in the road. And he was like, do you go right or do you go left? And he turned left and he said, like, something about getting ready for the journey. And I felt it because I knew that was the point in my journey that I was at. I was either going to go right or I was going left, but I knew by the end of that retreat, I was going to know my answer and I was going to be set on the path I needed to be on for the rest of my life. I just didn't know that it was going to be what it ended up being, and there was no way of me being able to imagine that. Because no matter what I thought my life would have been, it was going to end up being so much better than I ever could have imagined. But also, when I looked into my future at that point, I couldn't see anything. It wasn't dark, but it was like this blank. It was just like this bright light, and all I could see was just white. And so I couldn't even envision what it was going to be like. But Emmaus definitely set me on my new path.
So Emmaus got you prepared for a new journey.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what I heard there is kind of wiping your canvas clean.
Yes.
So October 22nd,
Mm-hmm.
and that's today's date.
Yes.
Let's talk about October 22nd a year ago.
So October 22nd of 2018 was what we consider our fourth day of the Emmaus. So it's a 3-day retreat. And on that last day, they really talk about your fourth day being the rest of your life and continuing on that journey.
So what, 45 minutes?
Yeah. So I had met someone during the Emmaus walk who will always be a significant part of my journey because she's the one who introduced me to my new life. And she opened up that door for me. And she told me about this group, Recover Out Loud, while I was there. And I knew it was something that I probably needed to try because I knew leaving from the Emmaus, I didn't want to go back to those old people, places, and things. I knew I didn't want to smoke weed anymore. I knew I didn't want to go out and party anymore. I knew I didn't want anything to do with my ex anymore. I was ready to fully let it all go. But I knew in order to let it go that I had to gravitate towards something new. Mm-hmm. And that was the scripture that was given to me during that time. In order to make room for the new, you got to let the old die. And I did. I allowed the old to die that weekend. But now here's room for the new. And so when I was given this invitation, I was more than open-minded to it. I was willing to try anything new. So the fourth day, I wake up and out of habit, I'm reading my Bible, drinking my coffee, and I light up a joint. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that was stupid because I wasn't desiring it. I was in a good mood. There was nothing in me that needed that. It was just out of habit at that point. So I called my friend Tiffany, who I met, and I said, can we continue what we did? We did a lot of hiking and talking and eating together. I said, can we do that today? And so we went and met for lunch. We went on a hike, and it just so happened to be the night of the Recover Out Loud meeting in Greensburg. And so she invited me, and I went to this meeting. I met these people. And I just knew it was a feeling that I was looking for. Connection. It just put this excitement for my new life. I just felt it.
Have you ever tried any other type of support groups before Recover Out Loud?
Yeah, I had tried Al-Anon once, shortly after my dad died. And it wasn't good for me because a lot of the family members were just kind of complaining and crying about their loved ones, and that wasn't a good mindset for me to be in. I tried Celebrate Recovery, but it's almost like I was kind of like in between. It's like I wasn't fully codependent, but I wasn't full addict. I was like somewhere in the middle. I was always like teetering on the fence of both. So I just never, it wasn't the programming that I was needing. I was needing people to live life with. I was needing people to show me what recovery looked like, not tell me and teach me about recovery. I taught recovery. I needed models, I needed mentors, I needed people who was gonna join this life with me and not just show up to a meeting once a week and tell me to do some book work throughout the rest of the week.
So what made Recover Out Loud different for you? Why did it work for you?
That very first day, I bought into it. I was sold on the very first day, mainly because it was different going live on Facebook. And I've always been a person to really love sharing my story, and I felt powerful, and I felt like the healing was already beginning just by talking about it, talking out loud about where I came from and owning my story. I didn't have to hide anymore. For all my life I was wearing these masks and I was hiding behind them. And for the first time I could take that mask off and really just be myself. And talk about my problems without any shame. The other part of it was that we all went to the Indianapolis Canal right after the meeting, and me growing up in Indianapolis, it was really cool to go back and make a new memory there. And it was just the conversations that we had that night, the laughter. I automatically felt like I found my people. I found the relationships I had been wanting my entire life real, authentic people, and more than anything, I found that it was possible that people really could recover, and it gave me hope again. That addiction didn't have to run my life anymore.
There's two things you said here I'd like to hit on. One, you talked about being authentic, a place to have a voice without your mask, things like that. Why did ROL, or Recover Out Loud, how did it help you take your mask off and give you such an authentic voice? What was that like? Did you just need something to give you a voice? Is that all you was ever missing?
I think because the environment was set up that way, that anybody had a voice, I think, I think you did a good job creating that environment. So it was easy to adapt to it. Also, I remember my first conversation with Jason and him asking me questions, and it wasn't about my loved ones. It was about me. What did I want? And so I felt like I actually had permission to just think about myself. Not for any other purpose, but just what I wanted. And I don't think anybody ever truly asked me what I wanted in my life. And, so I think I was just given permission to not care about anybody else but myself. And I think I really needed that it was okay to worry about me and not anybody else anymore. It's almost like I was relieved from my duties. I didn't know that I carried that for so long. And I think it was okay. It was okay.
So, you came in to Recover Out Loud, you have a voice. Let's talk about the last year. What an amazing year it's been.
Yeah.
Who would ever thought? How have you evolved over the last year? How far have you come? How have you grown? What's different about you now?
Everything. That girl served a purpose in my life, who I was. And I feel sorry for her that she never was able to experience this earlier. But I feel like this was always those days that I remember fantasizing about, that tomorrow's going to be better, tomorrow's going to be better. Like, I'm in my tomorrow. That bright light that I could see, they say white light is actually just a multitude of all the different colors.
Right.
Into one. And I always picture it as that bright light that I was looking at was just all the different colors that God was about to fill my life with. And it passed my expectations. Like, I really just surrendered and let go, and I've been on this journey of faith. I don't try to control anything. I really stay focused on myself. I try not to worry. I fought hard to change from the inside out and everything about me. My thinking, my emotions, my spiritual understanding, I started from the ground up again. I relearned everything. I tore down everything that was ever built before that, and I started all over.
You had to die.
I did.
You had to die for something new to take place.
And I did die. Like, there's nothing in me. That person it's not here.
I've heard you talk a few times about faith in your addiction story and your recovery story.
Mm-hmm.
How does the divine play its role in your life today?
My understanding of faith is different than what I thought it was. Faith to me before was, I was always still seeking for answers on the outside, like like my job or my house or people, or it was very externally focused. But faith has turned inward over this last year. That no matter what happens around me, people, places, things, that my faith and the thing that's inside me cannot be broken. It cannot be shaken. It's embedded of who I am. And so that gives me more of the courage to really trust the process and the journey of it all. If I lose my job tomorrow, that doesn't change God's plans for me. If I lost ROL, that would be petrifying, or if I lost my house, or if I lost whatever, any of those external things, that as long as I remain strong within, then everything's going to be okay. I also think my faith has always been, I think that's where I'm just spiritually rooted in that. It allows me to see life in a way different way. And I don't think I had that full understanding of it before, because I was allowing outside things to control my perception of everything. Where now, I always look inward for the answers and solutions and the truth, because that's where it all is.
One other thing I wanted to touch on, did I skip by accident, but you talked about examples and models of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
You said you had never really seen that before. In ROL you did.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that something you needed to see?
Because I desperately wanted to see it in my dad. I desperately wanted to see that my entire life. I needed to know that addiction didn't have to be a part of life. And I needed to see the other side of that, because again, addiction raised me. I needed to see that there was more to life than that. I needed to see that drugs and alcohol and toxic relationships and mediocrity, I needed to see that it was possible, because if it wasn't, then I had no chance of finding myself. So when it really comes down to it, recovery gave me the example I needed growing up. I needed my dad to be sober a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I needed recovery to raise me. But because recovery was never introduced to me or my family, I was stuck in this cycle of addiction, and I needed to break through it. And if no one else could do it, then I was going to have to be the one to do it. And so I needed those examples and those models, so I had something to fight for my own life and for my children. My children are now raised in a recovery environment. They see it, they know all about it, and I can really trust in the fact that I finally broke the cycle of addiction in my family. Whether my mom and brothers and all of them go back and never get recovered, I recovered.
So here at Recover Out Loud, we like to make sure everybody gets a voice, and you just said, I recovered.
Yes.
I don't know who's watching right now. Maybe it could be that little girl that grew up with addicts as family, but maybe addiction raised them, however you want to look at it. But right now, I want to give you a chance to have your voice and to give whatever advice you'd like to give, maybe to yourself, however you want to do it.
My advice that I would have told myself a long time ago, if I was that little girl again, for whoever that little girl is, or love yourself enough to know what's right for you and what's not. And stand up to that. Fight for that. Because if I would have loved myself and truly knew what that meant, half the pain I would have experienced, I would have walked away from it a long time ago, and I wouldn't have allowed half the things that I allowed if I had truly learned to love myself. Yes, I loved my family. Yes, I loved everybody that I allowed to cause so much havoc in my life. It was because of my love for them. But if I had that much love for myself, I would have set those boundaries a long time ago, and I would have known my worth, and I would have fought a lot harder at building my own life instead of trying to build a life for somebody else.
Guys, I hope that you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. I hope you can see how addiction and recovery, just isn't for us alcoholics and addicts, that it's really for anyone and everyone who just really wants to become a better human being. Throughout your story, amazing courage, amazing faith. It absolutely blows my mind that you're sitting here with me today in the shape that you are.
Me too.
So we appreciate you and everything that you do. If you wish to connect with Recover Out Loud, get a hold of us on Facebook. You can go to Recover Out Loud on Facebook. You'll see our page. We are currently working on our webpage. And remember, if you want a voice, Recover Out Loud is here to give it to you.
Come and join us.
Come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you.